Welcome to our new series on decimals, where I'm going to help you make sure that your child is an expert at understanding decimals and knowing how to compute with them so that it makes sense. So let's get started. And the best place to get started is by looking at, in my opinion, decimal squares. Because too many people just begin with the decimal point and the digits without really seeing them. So let's begin by talking about what your child should see. This square represents one whole unit. Just like I discussed in my fractions series, it's the same idea. A whole unit in decimal land is equivalent to a whole unit in fractionville. And decimals, by definition, have to do with this idea of 10 parts equals 1. Because if you think about the word decimal, the prefix deci means 10. And at this point, you could be asking your child, what other words do you know that have deci in them? And depending on their age, it might be really hard. But words like decade, which is 10 years, is related. So this idea of tens and decimal begins with this unit square, which is now broken up into 10 parts. And those 10 parts are called tenths. Have your child count them, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and also discuss how each of these strips is 1/10 of this whole square. So this idea of why they're called tenths should make sense, because it takes 10 of them to make one whole. Now moving down to this next diagram, there are squares, and these are called hundredths. They're called that because it takes 100 of them to make one whole. But just as important is this idea that within this group of 100, each column and each row, if you were to shade in one row, that's 10 individual hundredths, which is equivalent to 1/10. So kids should understand that that's a big difference. You know, if this is 1/10, I'm just going to write it right here, then this represents 10 hundredths. And those are equivalent fractions, but each one of these little pieces is worth 1 out of 100. Now notice this is called decimals, but I'm beginning with fractions because your child should also always see that they're related and that there's a way to think about it both ways. Let's go down to this last part where you can barely even make out the size of each piece, because if I were to shade in just 1/100th, that's actually equivalent to 10 thousandths. So there's like little slivers in here, and each one is worth 1,000th. And so in one strip, if I color in an entire strip, which I'm trying to equate the size amount here in all three of these diagrams, this now is 100 thousandths, which sounds like a lot, because normally kids think that 100 and 1,000 is way more than like 100 or 10. And it's true, but in this case, the more represents more smaller parts. So 100 thousandths is equivalent to 10 hundredths, which is also equivalent to that 1/10. So before you even begin to introduce the notation for decimals, your child should understand the size relationship, because decimals need to be seen in order for children to make sense of them. Please like and follow for more, and don't forget to subscribe. There'll be a lot more about decimals coming up. Thank you.